Good morning, students. We have started the fourth unit, that is writing skills in communication skills 2 subject. In the previous lecture, we discussed creative writing. We discussed techniques for creative writing, types of creative writing, tricks and tips for creative writing. In this video, we'll discuss the second topic, that is story writing. How to write a story, what are the requirements of a story, and what are the steps that are involved to write a story. So we'll discuss story writing in detail in this video. Now let us look at what is a story. How do you define story? Generally, the story can be defined in this way. That is, a story is the telling of an event that could be fictional or real. A story is an art of telling of the event that could be fictional or real in such a way that the listener experiences or learns something just by the fact that he heard a story. So a story is nothing but an art of telling an event, or that could be fictional or real, and just by that the listener learns something by hearing that story. And a story is means of transformation of information. A story is a means of transformation of information, is transformation of experiences, transformation of attitude, or transformation of point of view. A story is a means of transformation of information, is a means of transformation of experiences, is a means of transformation of attitude and point of view. And every story as a teller and every story as a listener. Every story as a teller and every story as a listener. Story writing is an art. We have famous storytellers in the world. We have very famous storytellers in English literature as well as in almost all the literatures of the world. Geoffrey Chaucer, who is generally considered the maker of English language or the father of English language, was a very famous storyteller. He was a story writer too, story writer as well as storyteller. So here we have famous storytellers in India. R.K. was a great storyteller as well as story writer. He was the first Indian novelist. R.K. Rudyard Kipling. He was, of course, Rudyard Kipling's poetry. He wrote some novels. And Rabindranath Tagore was a great storyteller as well as he was a great story writer. He wrote any number of short stories. He wrote dramas. He wrote fiction, non-fiction. He wrote poetry too. So we have great literary scholars in India as well as in the world. So what are the requirements for writing a short story or writing a story? What are the requirements generally? So for writing a short story, approximately 10 to 12 hours of time is required. Time factor is very important to write a story. For example, some of the scholars or some of these story writers, they present the characters or they experience themselves. They go outside, they see something, they experience something, and they write in their stories. So this time spending is very important in story. So time factor is one of the important constraints for writing a story. So approximately 10 to 12 hours of time is required to write a short story, and 200 to 500 words. It could be more than 500 too, but basically 200 to 500 words are required to write a story. And an idea is important. So you should have an idea what exactly you want to express in your story. What exactly you want to tell, or what exactly you want to portray in your story. That also is one of the important constraints for writing a story. And writing devices also is very important, whether it, how you are writing. So writing devices could be short novel, allegory, satire, or in a essay, or in a how. So there are different writing devices. What writing device you are choosing for writing your story, so this is you can understand. So requirements for writing a short story is a time factor, could be 10 to 12 hours of time, 200 to 500 words, or more than 500 words. And idea is very important, because every story has an idea, every story has a message, every story has underlying theme. So you should have that idea. That idea must be compulsorily considered to write a story. And writing devices also is one of the important constraints for writing a story. And what are the steps that are involved to write a short story? So the first important step that is involved in writing a story is a setting. Setting is very important. For example, Thomas Hardy, a very famous English novelist during modern period, especially Victorian period, he chose a place. He created an imaginary place called Wessex. He portrayed all the characters. Or he wrote all the stories that revolve around or inside that place only. That is what is called setting is very important. Like we have in India, R.K. Narayan, he created an imaginary place called Malgudi. If you look at R.K. Narayan's short stories, all the characters like Ramu and his friends, Banyan Tree or Astrologer, great. We have the guide Raju, the character called Raju. If you look at all the characters, all the short stories are all in one setting, that is in Malgudi. So this is what is more important, that is one setting. A setting is more important for writing a story. Even if you look at Shakespeare, if you go back to Renaissance period, where we have Shakespeare and other writers, they picked up some places like England, Scotland, Venice, especially Italy, Venice, and they picked up very different places of Europe countries especially. So that you can find out. The second important step that is involved in the protagonist, how your protagonist is or should be in the story. Protagonist is nothing but the main character of a story. Every story has a main character. The main character is technically called as protagonist in literature. And the villain also is there. The villain is called as the antagonist. Generally, the main character is protagonist and the main character is elevated. And how your main character should be. For example, if you look at the character, if you look at great tragedies of William Shakespeare, like Hamlet, the King Hamlet was a great warrior. He's a great warrior. He's an educated man, a great warrior, but he has a lacuna. That means he has some default, that indecisiveness. So there is some fault. Even if you look at Romeo and Juliet, Romeo was a great man. He was a great warrior too. But unfortunately, he has to face different difficult situations to win his love. But at the end of the story, Romeo dies and Juliet, both of them die. So here you need to understand how your protagonist should be, how your protagonist must be, whether your protagonist should be emotional or should be conqueror, or should be a great man, a great warrior, or should have some problems. So this you need to understand. So find your protagonist first. Another important step, that is write the perfect first line. Perfect first line is very important. How your story begins. If a story begins without any problem or without any misconception or misunderstanding, that is it goes without any problem. But if a story suddenly starts in the middle, that is what abrupt beginning or abrupt starting, that is abrupt stories. If a story starts with confusing, ridiculous, nonsense, senseless, irrational, that is what is called absurd story. So we have different kinds of stories. Even if the story is connected with a history, that could be historical story. For example, Henry 4, Henry 5, Henry 6, Henry 7, Henry 8, and we have Richard 2, Richard 3, Julius Caesar, King Augustus. All these are historical dramas or historical stories, because these stories are connected with the history. And if nowadays now people are writing biographies or autobiographies. That is a story of a particular person. Even we have Milkha Singh biography now in India. We have Advaniji's biography we have in India. We have Abdul Kalam's biography. Even we have Abraham Lincoln's biography, the great man, one of the greatest presidents of America. We have Hitler's biography. So great people and great biographies we have. So they write the perfect first line of a story. For example, Julius Caesar, if you look at Julius Caesar's drama, the first line, I came, I saw, I conquered. One of the greatest lines, one of the greatest beginning lines of a story. I came, I saw, I conquered. Julius Caesar wins over Pompey, Rome celebrates. That you can find. So establish a surprise. When you write, when you begin the story, establish a surprise, establish a voice. Hamlet, if you look at the introduction of the Hamlet, what a piece of a work is a man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, how noble like God. So that's what you can find. So establish a surprise or establish a voice, be very clear, invite a scene. So that this is all very important for writing a story. And the fourth step is breaking the story into scenes. You have to break the story into different parts, different scenes. Because in the first part, you might introduce the character. In the second part, the story goes on. Maybe in the third part, some other characters might enter in the story. They might turn the story. Every story has a turn, has suspense. Suddenly the story, it goes in different way. So every story, break the story into different scenes. First scene, second scene. Even if you look at Romeo and Juliet, the first scene in the Romeo and Juliet, Romeo never meets Juliet in the first scene. In the first scene, in the sense, Romeo meets only Rosalind, his friend. Rosalind, actually. But when he goes to the party, in another scene, he sees Juliet. Then he falls in love. That you can find. So break this story into different scenes, different parts, and provide the structure and parts of the story. That is also important factor. Next, now you should research. If you involve all the characters, now the story should it should go. You should research now how to introduce suspenses, how to introduce twists, how to create horror and terror, how to create emotions, how to insert all of them, all human emotions in this story. That you need to understand. Now write, edit, finally publish. So these are the steps that are involved in story writing. We'll discuss precise writing and paraphrase writing in the next video. If you have any doubts, please message me. Thank you.